Hello again, I'm Jay Hicks with Gerald Properties, and we're back in downtown Fredericksburg at Goolrick's Pharmacy, diving today in a little bit of the lesser known history of the building and what went on down here. Of course, pharmacies were a big part of any city back in the turn of the 19th century, 20th century, and Goolrick's was no exception. Of course, the soda fountain trend took place right around 1900, and the other big issue that pharmacies became a part of was Prohibition. And Goolrick's was no small part of that here in Fredericksburg, and we're going to dive into that a little bit with Barbara Anderson with the Historic Fredericksburg Foundation. Well, good to see you. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to traipsing around Fredericksburg and learn a little bit more about this era in Fredericksburg.
Sounds great. There's a lot to tell.
All right, let's do it. Okay, we're in another spot in downtown Fredericksburg now with Barbara, talking a little bit more about the Prohibition area here in Fredericksburg. Right now we're at the corner of Caroline and Hanover Street next to Jay Bryan's, and standing across the street from another building, which I think is the one that you have interest in.
This is the old Athens Hotel. The Athens Hotel had a bar, which of course wasn't a bar anymore, and they had a big pool room on the first floor. So this picture shows a pool competition in the 1920s. Are you telling me that these guys weren't drinking alcohol?
They weren't smoking or drinking, Barbara.
Not at all, not at all. And there were several citations in police records about drunk and disorderly conduct.
Oh.
And a man named Albert Grimes was fined $20 for being drunk in public and carrying a concealed weapon.
Okay.
You want to know what the concealed weapon was?
That was going to be my next question, Barbara.
Brass knuckles.
Oh, wow. Okay. Sign of the times.
Exactly.
Sign of the times. Very
so
cool.
it was a pretty rowdy place.
Very cool. Okay, Barbara, we've taken a little stroll down Caroline Street. Back in the 1900s, Goolrick's would have been on Main Street, but we got Caroline Street here. And you made a comment that struck me, and that was, this was where people came to be seen. This was the location, downtown Fredericksburg, this part of town, and they came to be seen. And one of the places apparently they wanted to maybe not be seen so much was 812 Caroline Street standing behind us. What's special about 812?
Well, this was called the Virginia Cafe. And this place was also, well, they never used the term speakeasy. That's kind of a modern or, a kind of a customer point of view. But from the police action, they call it a disorderly house. And that was kind of their keywords. But here at the Virginia Cafe, you have all kinds of characters coming out of the woodwork. There was a guy named Poodles Limerick, who got fined $25 for illegally transporting liquor in the Virginia Cafe. And then there was another guy named Dinsky Scott. Dinsky Scott.
Great names.
I know, love the nicknames. And he was convicted of the possession of ardent spirits. So the Virginia Cafe was another place you could get liquor.
Get your whistle wetted.
Yes.
So to speak. All right, well, very cool. Good to see. All right, so we're making our way back to Goolrick's, and those were a couple of great locations. But are there any other places in downtown Fredericksburg that you could tell us about that had some of these colored histories?
There were a couple more. Up on William Street, there was this place called the White House Cafe, and they have many records of drunk and disorderly conduct. Probably my favorite was the A1 Cafe, located at the Opera House at the corner of William and Caroline Street. You could see these disreputable guys just hanging around the corner, and they had a lot of arrests at the A1 Cafe.
All right, another one of those places. Barbara, that was a really great experience going to those locations, showing us about the history related to Goolrick's. But now that we're back in the basement of Goolrick's, is there some history related to Prohibition that you could share with us about the pharmacy itself?
Absolutely. Goolrick's and other drugstores were allowed to fill prescriptions for alcohol. Each doctor in town could write up to 100 prescriptions a month for whiskey. and it could be up to 27 different ailments, including cancer, diabetes, and depression.
Of course.
Pretty easy to get through. And then they would get their prescriptions filled here at Goolrick's.
We found this obviously in the basement and have some speculation on what it may be, but perhaps you could shed some light on it in particular. So you mentioned that the pharmacies, the doctors would issue the prescriptions that people could bring to the pharmacies, and I think in some of our research we've located evidence of that. We found old prescription slips, we found old bottles, and some history about how the pharmacy would receive a considerable amount of this alcohol. But we think this might be a liquor safe, where it was utilized with the pharmacy to keep that precious medicine in a secure location, so to speak. What do you think?
Absolutely, absolutely. Alcohol was hard to come by at that time, and there were places, as we've seen, where you could definitely get some alcohol under the table. And there were also corners around town that you could ask people for. The corner around Hyperion was a big one. The corner at William and Caroline was another big one. And right here in front of Goolrick's was another very important corner where you could just like hang out, just like a drug dealer nowadays. And you could ask somebody and get some liquor. And it sure would be convenient if that liquor weren't put in a big safe like this.
So Barbara, a lot of activity on the streets, but when somebody wanted to come to the pharmacy themselves, maybe they had the prescription from the doctor, what was the process that we would see with the pharmacy?
Well, the pharmacists definitely had to keep track of all of the alcohol that they sold. And the federal government actually issued prescription booklets for the doctors and also for the pharmacists, and we have lots and lots of records of those. So they could keep track of where all the alcohol was.
Okay, and so here in Goolrick's, they were a part of that system. They were, and we found that they conducted their business legally. They were all on the up and up, albeit we may have found they distributed a lot.
Yeah, they did. They did.
Prohibition was a big deal, and certainly we felt that we're talking about the impacts it had on the city of Fredericksburg, but it evolved. It wasn't just the federal statute that came out and blanketed the country with this prohibition. There were localities, and the states really took this issue up long before the federal government did. Exactly. How did the city of Fredericksburg approach prohibition, and did they wait until the federal government said it wasn't against the law?
No, no. Even before the Civil War, there were lots and lots of prohibition groups in this area, temperance societies. I think there were 5 different organizations. And then after the Civil War, the push continued. And in 1906, Virginia passed a law saying that every county or city could vote whether or not to ban alcohol. And here in Fredericksburg, we voted 1908, 53% of the population voted to ban alcohol.
Okay, so that was the opportunity for each of the states to have the local option and without the state actually prohibiting it.
Right, so letting the local option, let each locality decide.
Okay. And then you mentioned the groups, the temperance groups. The temperance groups were organized pretty strictly just to battle the alcohol issue. Is that an accurate depiction?
Absolutely. In 1900, the average American drank 88 bottles of whiskey per year, 3 times what it is now. Okay. So the temperance groups kind of blamed alcohol for everything: domestic strife, bankruptcy, petty crime, anything like that.
Okay, so the groups in Fredericksburg were successful on the local level early on in Prohibition to restrict the sale of alcohol. How did it go from there?
Well, of course, the local bars opposed it, and they were some of the biggest movers and shakers in Fredericksburg society, so they pushed for another vote. In 1910, they had another vote, and 60% of Fredericksburg said, again, Fredericksburg should be dry. Wow. Now, all of Virginia went dry in 1916, and then nationally it was in 1920. But Fredericksburg and Goolrick's had been under Prohibition for quite some time.
Barbara, this is something that's not new to you. Prohibition sounds like it's been a time in history that's a particular interest to you. Tell me a little bit about how you pursued that interest.
The events coordinator for the Historic Fredericksburg Foundation. So we always put on all kinds of tours and walks and festivals. And in 2016, we decided to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Prohibition with one of our very, very popular bar crawls. So it's a history bar crawl. Then it kind of snowballed from there. I was offered a fellowship at the Virginia Library down in Richmond, and it's just kind of become an obsession.
So that's a lot of work and diving in, as we've said today, into the issue of Prohibition. So has that evolved into anything beyond research for you?
Absolutely. I do lectures on Prohibition. I do the pub tours on Prohibition. And I also offer non-alcoholic walking tours. My next one is offered through the city at Fredericksburg Walks on October 12th on Saturday mornings.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here today and sharing your knowledge with us and really putting a little more color into what we're trying to portray here at Goolrick's. It's fascinating stuff.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you for being with us. Okay, another great visit with some really good information about Goolrick's in downtown Fredericksburg and some of the history, especially in this case, that some of us maybe didn't know. So, as we've said before, we're going to continue to keep this rolling and putting this landmark back together in its proper state. So we look forward to seeing you again next time here on Reviving Goolrick's.
Please follow us on all our socials to stay up to date with the latest happenings.